Alright, in this video I'm going to do the outer tie rods on my 2012 Nissan Pathfinder. You see I've got a bit of a price breakdown from Nissan. I've already done the rear springs. I have not done the front lower ball joints, but I do have the outer tie rods now, and you can see that they're asking $620 plus tax. At 13%, that comes out to about $700 flat. They're going to want another $200 or so for the alignment, so you're looking at over $900 for this job. I got the outer tie rods for $20 each at Rock Auto, that's US, and in Canadian dollars it was $86 for taxes, shipping, and exchange rate. The torque spec for the nut on this is 37 foot-pounds, and I wrote it down on my palm for a little reminder while I'm doing this. You see I've got the tire off, I got the vehicle jacked up, there's an axle stand down there as well, and I'm using these Dorman parts, and there's the part number. Obviously that's the driver's side one. The passenger side has a different part number, and even if you don't know the part numbers, it's very obvious which one is which because they have a different shape to them, so you got to get two different ones. Don't buy the exact same thing and think they're going to go on. They do come with the compression nut, they come with the crown nut, and they do come with a new cotter pin, and that's about it. Now I've already sprayed all the threads down with a bit of PB Blaster, and you do need a 24mm wrench. I was fortunate enough to have one on hand. I didn't have to buy one. And then I have an adjustable wrench because there's a flat spot on the tie rods, and you can use the adjustable wrench there. For this one, I didn't need to use the hammer to loosen anything up. I just used the adjustable wrench and the 24mm wrench and adjusted that compression nut. And that's the first thing you want to do, and you want to do that before you take off the cotter pin. Now I'm just loosening it a little bit and then backing it off because I want the outer tie rod to end in the exact same location. So I just loosened that nut a little bit and then tightened it back up. So it's just touching the outer tie rod, and that'll make sure when I screw the new one in, it'll be approximately the same location. And that'll make sure that my alignment doesn't get way out of whack, and I'll be able to drive it to go get an alignment. Now I took out the cotter pin, and then to get off this nut, it's just a 22mm. And I'm just using a breaker bar. I don't have a socket that'll do 22mm. I do break it loose with an extension, but I don't think that that was actually necessary. The threads are fairly rusty, so it does take a little bit of work. And then I got this ball joint separator. This is the one item I splurged on and bought, and I think it was a good call. Otherwise, you'd have to beat the outer tie rod out with a hammer, and that could cause unnecessary wear. Whereas this ball joint separator just separates it through pressure. Now, like I said, that compression nut was loosened and then tightened back up, so it was just touching the outer tie rod, and now I'm going to turn it off, and I'm going to reuse that compression nut, so I'm not going to remove it. If you weren't doing that, it could be beneficial to count how many turns it takes to get the outer tie rod off. In this case, it's going to be, I think it's 13 turns to get it off. Another option for you would be to put the new compression nut on and then screw the new outer tie rod on 13 twists. But in this case, like I said, I have that compression nut on there anyway, so it is going to stop in the exact same location. And after I get this on, I do take it for a drive, and I don't find that the alignment is dramatically wrong after doing this. I am going to get an alignment, however, it doesn't pull to any side, it still tracks straight, and the steering wheel is nice and straight. In fact, there's no issue. I can't even really tell that I did the job, so I will get an alignment like I said, but I'll probably do the ball joints that Nissan said I should do first. Now the steering components do move around a little bit freely once the tie rod's off, but just move them back into position so that the outer tie rod can go up and through the steering knuckle. And then, so I'm just tightening that crown nut down to 37 foot-pounds, and it is give or take a little bit. In the end, I do have to turn it slightly so I can get the crown nut out of the way so that the cotter pin could go through. And then once the cotter pin's in, I'm just going to take some pliers and bend it back and over itself, and then straight down so that it's also going through the crown nut, and then obviously that won't shake loose. And then I'm just going to tighten up this compression nut, so I'll put the 24mm back on the nut, and then I'll put the adjustable wrench on the flat spot on the outer tie rod, and I'll just tighten it up. There's no torque spec, obviously, but you just want it tight. And I will just clean up those cotter pins a bit so they don't stab anyone or poke anything, and that's it. I put the tire back on, dropped the driver's side of the vehicle, and lifted up the passenger side. So same deal, I've already hit it with the PB blaster and it's soaked for a little bit. One trick I often use for these rusty parts of my vehicle is just put a jack underneath something so that the wrench or socket you're working with to hold the nut or to hold one of the ends of the nuts can't move around, and then just use a wrench or the dead blow hammer to loosen it up. So again, I just loosened up the compression nut that tightens against the outer tie rod. Take a hammer and remove that cotter pin, and then once again take the 22mm socket and remove the nut that holds the outer tie rod to the steering knuckle. For whatever reason, these aren't crown nuts like the nuts that came with the outer tie rods that I bought, but whatever, I guess they held on. And once again, I will put the ball joint separator into the tie rod and I will separate it from the steering knuckle. And it does pop off fairly easily, although they do pop off a bit aggressively. So just keep that in mind if you're using one of these separators. And once again, this one takes, I believe, 13 turns to get it off the inner tie rod. Overall, I think this job took about an hour and a half. If I wasn't filming it, I could probably get this job done in an hour, so I'm a little bit surprised that Nissan is charging $620 plus tax for this, considering how cheap the parts are at about 20 bucks per outer tie rod. So there's a lot of savings to be had in doing this job yourself, and quite honestly, from what I found here, it is pretty easy. So once again, screw the outer tie rod on and clean up the steering knuckle, and then put the threads up and through the steering knuckle and put the crown nut on. And once again, I'm going to 37 foot-pounds. Again, it is a little bit plus or minus because obviously that crown nut has to line up with the holes that are on the outer tie rod. But once I've got it at 38 foot-pounds, that's it. I'm going to take the cotter pin, put it through the outer tie rod, and then bend it back over itself so that it can't be removed. So like I said, overall, doing this job myself, I did save over $600 from what Nissan would have charged me. It took less than 2 hours, even with filming it, having to get all the tools out, that kind of thing. And overall, it was a pretty easy job, and that is with a pretty rusty vehicle. Anyway, like I said, I don't find it pulling to one side or the other, nor is the steering wheel off-centered in any way. But either way, I am going to get an alignment fairly shortly. Anyway, overall, I found this job was pretty fast and easy to get done, and it was a great money saver. Thanks for checking out my video. Don't forget to like and subscribe.